All right, let's get started. So, my name is Esmeralda Cartagena Collazo. I am a PhD candidate at Texas Women's University and also an adjunct professor. Um, my research focuses on the preservation of indigenous languages and heritage languages of minority students and immigrant families. And I have the opportunity today to interview Amber as part of a partnership with Dr. Stewart and NCTE,
And what's NCTE?
the National Council of Teachers of English.
Gracias. Okay. It's wonderful to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to interview you, to spread the words, and just to get the middle school and English teachers to get to know more about your work and how can they use it in the classroom to inspire their students. So let's get started. Amber, I have to tell you that it's such a joy to have you with us today. As a fellow Puerto Rican, this moment feels especially meaningful for me. It's truly an honor to be the one who gets the chance to have the conversation with you. Your work carries such richness and depth, and I know that our audience is eager to hear about more about that journey behind it because I want you to share with us a little bit about how your path as an artist unfolded and what ultimately drew you as an artist to explore themes of identity, colonialism, and the Caribbean heritage. But before you answer this question, tell us, who is Amber?
Okay. My name is Amber Robles-Gordon, and I consider myself an Afro-Puerto Rican and full-bred, full-born Caribbean. Um, I am a multidisciplinary visual artist. I create large-scale installations, textile sculptures, collage. I really work hard to match the intention narrative with the technique, the best technique, most meaningful technique to convey whether it's an installation, a solo exhibition, a commission, a public artwork. Um, Creating has always been something that feeds my spirit. And I've been so grateful because I really realized early that I wanted to be an artist. I've known since I was, 8 years old that I wanted to be an artist. And then even more so, I am absolutely fortunate that I have a mother who who did her very best to make sure that I was able to follow through on that intention. Um, and I'm so grateful for her. Like I was telling somebody, in fact, I was telling the museum that I was speaking to earlier how much my mom means to me, and I'm grateful for that. And my brother, kind of cool too. He's all right. As far as brothers go, you know.
And it's so that's such a powerful way to start your story. It's just so funny. We always try to include everybody, but we need to include everybody. All right. So um where there's a moment when you knew, because you mentioned that you always knew that you were since you were 8 years old, but what was that moment specific that told you, oh, Amber, you're gonna be an artist?
Ah, okay, so when I got, you know, the request to have this conversation and my work to be included in the journal, one of the things that flashed back into my memory was an interaction I had, and I want to say that it might have been like between kindergarten and first or second grade. And I went to magnet schools through my mom put me into magnet schools in Arlington County because that's where I was raised. And I remember being, and I say that magnet schools because I was always one of a handful of people of color.
Oh, wow.
Um, and I thought to myself, I want to figure out how to share some of my insights and how literally these things correlate and work together collectively to make me, I think, create the works that I've created, and tell the narrative and push boundaries that I try and inform that I try to do through my work. Okay. So Miss Rebold. Miss Rebold was a she was a white woman. And I guess through the eyes of probably, I don't know, maybe a 7-year old. I don't know what her like specific heritage was, but I just remember we were doing an assignment, and we were doing collaging. And I think we were instructed to do like a Christmas collage. And I remember her seeing my collage and she was so excited and she brought it up to the front of the room and she explained to the class why my collage was so successful. And I just remember feeling so pleased and so proud from that experience. Um, And not to say that that was more valuable than all the love and nourishment and support that my mom has given me to continue to lift and be able to go forward, being an authentic, creative person and knowing that that has value, right? But it was still memorable. Miss Rebald left an imprint on me. And I really, I appreciate her for that. And I thought, now there was other teachers that I did not like. Other teachers, other teachers that I very specifically felt that they were catering to some of the even like one particular teacher, she catered to the boys, the white boys in her class, and she treated everybody else differently. And I remember noticing it even then. I think I've always been attuned to inequity and injustice, even in the small increments, like the chills will come, um, because even very early, I knew, wait, how you are either treating me or how you are treating them is not okay.
Mhm.
So I probably went way off of the subject matter, but
No, 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 that's
bring
very
me back.
powerful.
Help me bring me back.
No, 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 because that is very powerful story, and I can connect with some of the things that you share with us, and this is going to lead perfectly into my next question about your influences, because you mentioned the teacher that influenced you with the positive feedback that you received from her. But
Yeah.
growing up, what cultural, other personal, or artistic influences shape your creative voice?
So my mom made sure that we knew that expression, being creative. We literally had she called it the creative closet.
Mm.
So back in the day, I remember when we were in an apartment, and the model of that apartment where there was like one long linen closet, right? And she made that linen closet our creative closet.
Mm.
So each shelf had like different um subject matters to some extent. Like there were games, but there was like a section for sewing, a section for
Okay.
creating
Nice.
Christmas ornaments. It was all this range. And so it's always been very intentional in my life, creating. Whether it be through drawing, journaling, photography. It started very early and it was very intentional and it was very connected to family, to communication,
Wow.
to community.
Wow, that gives such a clear picture of your foundation, how all this amazing work started. So, and do those influences still guide you, or have they evolved over time?
Um, so the other side of the influences was that my mom, being an Afro-Latina, she worked in various health organizations
Oh,
throughout Washington, D.C. And so, for example, she worked at the Office of Latino Affairs, the District Office of Latino Affairs. She worked for, which was in the Reeves Building, which is a building in the district which had various district offices, meaning connected to the government. And she worked for an organization called Said Center and or the Mary Center, and they were all organizations that were where individuals of color and primarily Latinos, but also definitely Afro-Latinos and a range of other cultures went to get their health care, went to get social support, went to get even mental support. And so because of where she worked, and she made like a very distinct effort to I think because she wanted to continue, being able to speak the language, you know, and she wanted to help. But I know that there was a part of her that was seeking, her to maintain her Latinidad to some extent, that connection. Um, And because of that, I had this myriad, this array of people in my community that were various forms of either Caribbean or Latino. And that was absolutely one of the threads that has been along the way. In addition to that, my mom tells me that my my favorite part of the museums, like she took me everywhere, like literally everywhere was the impressionist, like of the National Gallery of Art. She said that I was drawn, that was my favorite part of the gallery.
that's great.
Yeah. So, like again, so community, the power of art, um, and how it relates to communication have always been threads, and they continue to be. So, for example, I'm working on a body of work. It's going to Canada
Oh,
in the beginning of October. So I still, like my mom is one of my thought partners.
oh,
One, because we're so much alike, There are some variables out there, in terms of how we are different, but very in terms of core beliefs, we're very much alike. So in preparation for this exhibit, my mom was just here earlier. Um, I was, we were going back and forth about where this potential work is going. And um, yeah, she's one of the people that I have that continued conversation with about my beliefs, my artwork, my social practice. And yeah.
that's great. How sweet you speak about your mom and how, you know, moms can inspire us in so many different ways, right? So,
Yeah. And even for those that don't have, you know, um, because for a second I thought, what about the people that don't have their moms?
mhm.
Um,
True.
I know that mom energy, that woman energy can come from other sources, and that's important too, and valid.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just um getting to know the people that is going to be on your side, you know,
Mm,
like the people that want the best for you and the people that is going to provide you the support that you
mhm,
need to make your dreams come true, to be able to move forward.
hmm. Yeah, it's really critical. And even when they don't come in traditional forms,
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
very
Mm-hmm.
critical. Yeah.
Well, Amber, I would love to talk about more about your artistic approach, which I think it's absolutely admirable. And I have to say that in all these days that I've been reading about you and looking at your pictures with details, I would say like your work beautifully combines quilting with contemporary mixed media. How do you develop this approach, and what does quilting symbolize in your practice?
Um, so the bodies of work that you were looking at were Successions Traversing U.S. Colonialism, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I've always early on I had an interest in fashion and that then turned into an interest in fabric. Um, and in grad school, I was at this great fork in the road. Do I go down the abstraction road or do I go down the figurative road? And I chose abstraction, and it's most likely because of the use of color and what I would consider like energy, right? Or light energy. When it came to abstraction, that's where I felt I could utilize my love of color and energy the most.
Mm.
And then merge in fabric. So the other side of it is that I was exposed to quilts and other forms of uh, I want to say Southern America fabric hand sewn works.
Oh,
I was exposed to a range from like Cuba to Ecuador to El Salvador. All I had My mom had this collection
wow,
of
that's
arts um that have always been like and including Cuba that and very specifically like the G's Bend quilts. My mom exposed me to those very, what I would consider early. And so they've always been both cultural and aesthetic benchmarks
mm.
that I have gone back to. And it's funny, I was in PR at the beginning of is it this year? Yeah, it was this year.
Oh, wow.
And I was looking at something, I found something in one of the stores and I brought it back because I was there with my the bomba teacher that been practicing with.
Oh,
And it was this, I want to say it's a Salvadorian, and um it's like where it's very bright and it's like a layered landscape and it tells a story, right? Like a social story, a community story. And I was looking at it like, oh my God, this brings back so many memories and blah blah blah. And she was like, eh. And I thought, oh. And so what registered to me was that it it kind of it wasn't specifically Puerto Rican.
oh, wow.
And so it took me a minute because my feelings were hurt, but I got it. It wasn't specifically Puerto Rican, so she didn't have a register for that specific thing, and she's a seriously wonderful and intelligent woman, so it's not like she's not exposed. But what it did for me, it was like, wow, the range of things that my mom, put into my registry of what is art, what is culture, what is, valuable, what is meaningful. Um, and I had to say to myself, Amber, I am happy that you still find joy in seeing this image. And I bought a set for myself and I bought a set for my mom. And when my
Wow.
mom opened it up, she got it. She remembered like having that in the pieces of this artistry in our home. And I can't remember what made me tell that story, but I looked over to the left and I saw them. That's what it was.
Oh, I just love that it's just so fascinating because you're like mixing tradition and innovation together, and that's how this
Uh,
came, you know. When do you realize that quilting could carry these layer meanings?
So very specifically for for that body of work, Successions Traversing U.S. Colonialism, I had decided, I knew that I was going to be presenting a solo exhibition for American University,
Mm,
and I wanted to reference a body of work called the Bed Series by Robert Rauschenberg. And I thought to myself, as I was preparing for the exhibit, um, I was like, oh, this is going to be great. I'm going to go completely abstract. Nobody's going to tell me nothing. And then, um, so that was in between. I think I found out in 2017, 2018. And then all the issues with, was it Hurricane Maria? That was the first one in that succession of hurricanes.
mhm,
And then I was watching the treatment of how Puerto Ricans and the lack of were being treated, and then the lack of what's the word? Support, funding, and importance that was also not being given to the U.S. citizens that live in St. Thomas.
mhm.
That were also affected by that hurricane. And I remember just this it hurting, why are you treating my people that way? And so I couldn't do anything about it then. But you know how you you see something and you're like, I'm gonna figure out, and you tuck it back, until you can go back and find the right time.
Yeah.
So that's how that started. And I had decided that quilts, and specifically quilts that were hanging from the ceiling, were going to be a way to an entry point to having that conversation. And at one point, I actually wanted them to be hanging from chains,
Mhm.
to reiterate, some of the issues in terms of U.S. politics and its treatment of its citizens that reside in the U.S. territories. And you wouldn't believe how hard it is to find that amount of chains to hang that large of works, but it was hard. Um, yeah, and then when you look at Gee's Ben's quilters, like there's always been a thread of wanting to transform something into art for me. Like the innovation has always been
Yes.
very key for me. Like I remember the first time, I don't know if you're aware of Alma Thomas. Are you aware of Alma Thomas's work?
Mm-mm. No,
No?
not familiar.
She was an African American woman who she's part of the Washington Color School, and she did paintbrush strokes and left white space in between.
Mm.
Um, and it gave like a measure of vibrance. It's very, very close to the use of white and combination of colors in impressionist paintings and also pointillism, right?
Oh, okay.
And so I was always drawn to the way in which she utilizes, and then the way it impacted my response to color and to it and its placement. And that literally, like a good portion of my thesis paper was was about those three things: Alma Thomas, um, what is it, George Seurat, and pointillism, impressionism,
Wow.
because of the correlation and the use of color, and how our I'm sorry, how our eyes take in the sensation of color, and it impacts our emotional response.
And I
Uh,
can tell you that all of those colors are like transmitting the stories of all of the victims for the hurricanes because even though like by that time I was here in the United States, but my family was also impacted and I
yeah,
know what it feels not to have empathy for people that are struggling, especially all being also US citizens. I understand perfectly what you're talking about.
yeah, yeah. And that body of work, it started with the series Place of Breath and Birth. which were the smaller works on canvas, and those were specifically about my Puerto Rican heritage, and then also my interpretation of some of the things that I experienced when I was there. But it was the larger series was literally in researching about my personal heritage. It was then that I realized this is not just about Puerto Ricans.
To learn.
Um, this is about anti-blackness. This is about
Mhm.
anti, everything that is not, under the realm of white, Caucasian, and of European descent.
Mhm.
And so that's why I created the quilts because, and then you have millions of human beings that are living in the territories. You have Puerto Rico, you have Guam, you have American Samoa, you have Northern Mariana Islands, um, and you have USVI. And then you also have the District of Columbia because we're not labeled as a Commonwealth. Um, it's a federal district, but our vote is still not completely, we do not have full representation
No, we
in
don't.
yeah.
We don't.
So that's why I include, oh, so I forgot. And I included DC quilt. That's why I included a DC quilt.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's fine. Perfect. No, I mean, now that you already explained to us, you talked to us about the form, I want you to shift to the process
Mm.
because your pieces tell complex stories through a lot of visual narratives. How do you approach storytelling in your art?
Mm.
Because I see a story behind this. How do you approach storytelling in your art?
Um, so I consider creating as a form of journalism, a form of like being a researcher, a communications, major to some extent. Um, and so I really, for the most part, especially works that incorporate some sort of figuration and or very distinct symbolic symbols,
Mhm.
um, or like expressionist symbols. I do a whole hell of a lot of research.
So
Uh,
yeah.
so in order to tell that story, I have to go back and um, find the right supportive information to direct my interpretation of the didactic into, imagery and or symbolism that people will hopefully be able to identify and relate to.
And
It's
that's a
it's a
beautiful process.
process.
It is a beautiful process. And it is a beautiful process. So now let me ask you, do you see yourself as both an artist and a storyteller?
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny about the word storyteller because a storyteller, I, I I know that it means both telling stories that are true and creating fantasy to some extent, right?
Mhm.
And so I guess in some of my works, I definitely allow myself to I guess relax and do fantasy. Which sounds so nice. But a lot of my works, I have to go to the other direction because I have found that I'm a really I'm a passionate person, but I'm also a very sensitive person. And I find in saying that, I find that using my voice through creation is one of my most successful ways of communicating. And so, because there's so much going on in this world that I really take issue with, with the treatment of people of what I would call of color and or, that are being marginalized and oppressed and belittled. And I try to tell some of our stories through the artwork. So it's very intentional. A lot of the work is absolutely very structured, in terms of how I layer information and then bring you into. the works and the concept and the narrative and the research. Um, yeah,
And all of them transmit a lot of stories. And I just hope that everybody have the opportunity to get the message through this, because we need to teach people that if you don't tell your story, somebody else is going to do it for you in the wrong way. So you're telling your story
yeah.
through art, and that is very powerful.
Thank you. Yeah. One other point that I wanted to make was part of my, I think, in the last like 2 years, there was a part of me that, and even when I was creating that series, I was wondering how is it that I feel that I can tell this story?
Mhm.
Um, and there was a point, where I looked at it and I'm like, can you tell the story? The actual like an interpretation of or at least attempt to tell an interpretive um variation of what millions of people are going through.
Yes.
And I really had to I don't know, I had to dig deep. There was it was a lot. It was heavy for a moment, but what I realized is it would be heavier if I was to attempt at walking away and not
Just
contributing to that dialogue.
absolutely.
And I
You're
couldn't,
the voice of a lot of us. You're
yeah.
the voice of a lot of us.
And I knew that my intention was good, so I literally had to call on the universe and say, like, it sounds silly, but like, my heart. Um, Please lead me. And at every juncture, that if there was doubt, it was um, that more of us, it's very intentional. There's a narrative in that particular body of work. It's called the people of the greater majority,
Hmm.
or global North versus global South. And um, I knew that it was important to me to find ways to reinforce spirituality, connection to the land,
Hmm.
our basic rights as human beings, all of us. We all come from a fetus. We all come from the connection of the sperm, and it's not one and not the other,
Hmm.
right? And it all eventually comes to us being all human beings.
Hmm.
And I that's like the ground, humanity is the underpinning of my work. Um, And that has always kind of driven me forward. That's always okay. So I totally went this way when I want to go that way. So part of what I went back to research in the last 2 years, when I was like really contemplating how is it that I can do this work, I realized I started to reach back to friends
Hmm.
and from my earlier like I had a few friends that I had known through elementary school,
Wow.
and then through high school. Um, And I realized that in that handful of people, colored people that I referenced earlier, there was such a variation.
Wow.
I had a friend who had the same birthday as me, and from elementary school to high school, we went to the same schools, and he was Native American. So I had that,
Mm.
um, I don't know, like imprint. Okay. I had a friend who was Pakistani and mixed with Pakistani and white. Um, so there was that imprint. I had a friend that was mixed, African American and white. There was that imprint. I had other friends that were from other parts of like the Middle East
Oh.
and parts of Africa. So I was exposed to through the magnet schools. I was exposed to a range, and of course, there's also the people from that were born and raised in the district and or Arlington and Maryland. But it gave me exposure to many pockets of the world.
Mhm.
And the other reason why I wanted to do this conversation was people need to be more mindful of our communication and our influence. And I wanted to I don't know, reiterate how important and I've taught before. I've taught, from kindergarten to collegiate, um, how important our little deposits are to our future society, to our future human beings. And epigenetics is real. We leave imprints,
Mhm.
and it could be the smallest thing. And teaching be a part of, someone's cultivation,
Mhm.
their education is essential. Um, so there was just something about this request, and I was like, oh, you mean I get to talk to the teachers? I get to reinforce what one teacher did for me, that I get to hopefully encourage the teachers that are out there to, if it's your calling, if you are where you are meant to be, please continue. Please know that you are needed, you are important. And what you do is so impactful.
Mhm.
Um, how you treat your students, how you leave deposits of good, of love, of care, of well-being, of intention, of support, knowledge is so essential to it's not even just the next generation, it's like every
Every
generation.
generation. Mhm.
So yeah, I hope
I
that makes
really love when you say pockets of the world that you grew up, that you had that opportunity in your life. And it's also for me to tell the teachers to see their students also as pockets of the world. Because one of the things you mentioned was knowledge. They bring so much knowledge. They don't have to speak English, they just have knowledge and they have another language. So that's very powerful. I really love that phrase, pockets of knowledge. I want to adopt it. You know, and that brings us to my next question that let's talk about, how can we guide students? What advice would you give English teachers about helping the students to read a piece of visual art like yours as deeply as they will if it was a poem or a novel?
hmm Um, yeah, that's a deep question because I remember I taught in high school, and I definitely had ESL students. And I remember showing them, trying to break down visual aesthetics into language. And then it's not just language, but then meaning associated with the specific language,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because, this one example, I, one of the exercises was breaking down, I don't remember what the overall um, artwork was, or whether it was associated with a specific lesson. But what I did was I took these images of various things, and one of them happened to be beautiful. And so what I did was, and then you would have to, it's a process of elimination. You'd have to match beautiful to something, I don't know, impressionist with something.
Mm.
Let's say, what else? I can't think of something else that you have to match. But anyway, and so the last thing, not the last thing, but it was the process of deduction, right? And I remember there were Latino students that didn't automatically understand that beauty could come along with an image of a brown woman. And I had to, without putting my own, and I'm not saying that my own bias was in there. My bias, my wanting, and it was something that I knew that my class, it came up in other parts of my class, right? Who is beautiful, who deserves to be admired, who deserves to be fawned over, whatever. Um, and I had to figure out ways to press against that, but to teach, not judge, but still press against it, right? And so um, I remember pushing through that. So what I'm ultimately saying is you have to find a way to make it the information accessible, and parcel it to some extent if need be. Um, and if you can do that, like collectively, it will be understandable. It will be hopefully internalized, but definitely in the moment understandable, and then be able to apply that.
That's very practical. Teachers will find that very empowering. Do you have an example of a time a student surprised you with, their interpretations of your art?
Oh, wow. Um, well, I have one example of like how they interpreted the practice of art. Um, I taught in the same time period that I was teaching high school. I had a lesson where I was teaching my students how to weave, to do hand weaving. And this is most likely this specific class that I'm going to reference. I'm pretty sure that they were like 9th through 12th graders. And so I remember at the time, as part of being monitored by the school system, they would do pop-up, monitoring. And I thought to myself, oh my God, what like the one time I'm not at a position where it makes sense to interrupt my students to um to impose another aspect of the lesson to them. A monitor comes up and I just had to be because literally my class was quiet. My students were so enthralled in the weaving activity that I didn't have to I don't know, impose over them or even like they were doing what they were supposed to be doing, right? And they had a deadline and they were engaged. And that's part of the practice of creating. Creating can soothe the mind. It can soothe the spirit. And I was enjoying watching my students do that. And then this monitor came in. I'm like, anyway, um, now I got monitored and evaluated poorly for that. But what I was able to walk away with and the students, like some of the students that told me they're not weaving nothing when I first introduced, the lesson.
Oh my God.
Some of them came up with these beautiful, beautiful
Oh,
weavings. And, you know, so that wasn't specifically my artwork, which I have plenty of examples, but I brought this because, or shared this because I think that was invaluable.
oh wow. That's true. They don't see the um the power behind weaving and how other students can connect because in their cultures they also weave. And it's not only a source of living, but it's part of their identity in the clothes that they wear and everything that they make, their purses, everything is weave.
It's a measure of that. But
Yeah,
it,
so
but
mhm.
even more in terms of beyond that, there's also the fact that they were introspective. at that moment. They were connecting. I didn't have to teach anymore because, meaning in that moment, because they knew what they were doing and they were connected and committed to it. How is that not a lesson learned? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah, another reason to value the teachers and the
Absolutely. Yeah.
process
And
of
what they bring
practice.
to the classroom and what they bring to the classroom and the impact that they have in their students. And now that we're talking about the classroom and that you mentioned that you were a teacher, how might your work now inspire classroom projects where students use collage or mixed media to tell their own stories? How do you think?
Well, I definitely think it's possible because part of the my own model for my in terms of why I create, because I absolutely, tackle heavy things like
Mhm,
colonialism, but on the flip side of that, a lot of my stories are definitely rooted in personal experiences. Um, and I often use, whether it be in my own, when I taught or in my own practice in terms of when I go around and talk about my work and talk about art in general, I use the reference of there are things that we work through in the micro versus macro,
mhm,
the things that we work through for ourselves. You know, how do we tackle this issue? How do we change this aspect of our lives? How do we center our minds? How do we various things, or how do we change our perspective about something that's happening in our social environments,
mhm,
um, where you have to look at yourself, right? Your own behavior, your own thoughts, and then you have to look at your environment, right?
mhm,
How you are reflecting an aspect of your environment and how vice versa. Um, and so most of my works are about a thought pattern, concern I have in my own life, and then I take it outside of myself. How, if I'm having this thought, there's got to be other people having this concern
mhm,
or enjoying this moment or seeing the connections between this issue and this issue. Um, and that can be applied anywhere.
absolutely.
That is a form of communication. It's a form of writing, or it can be interpreted into writing or worked through writing. If you want to take it to the social level, then you have journalism, you have communication, you have being on the radio, you have podcasts. All of these things, there are layers. They start within you, right? And then you begin to take them outside of the realm of you and check the other aspects of our society and
Mhm.
yeah.
That's powerful. I
Mm.
think it's a wonderful model for students' expressions. And one of the things that you mentioned, and that your art directly engages with colonial history. How do you think, or how can teachers use art to introduce the colonial perspectives in the classrooms that often center Euro-American narratives?
Very carefully, but it is essential. And I think artists have been working for a very long time to give you a range of subject matter and tools, visual tools, to have that continued, conversation. There's a range of artists. There's Carrie Mae Weems, there's Carrie Marshall. There's a whole range. You have photography, you have videography, you have, paintings, you have I can't think of anything else, but like there's a lot of us out here that are committed and that have no choice but to communicate in this way. I think one of the things that I try to impart um, when I'm talking about, because a lot of times because I do work, some of my work is definitely rooted in in anti-colonialism and about other aspects of race. I um I often tell people because they'll ask me like, what should I be looking for? How should I change what I'm doing? And one of the things I say is if you look around in your environment and all you see is a reflection of yourself, then you have to change something. If you are only seeing a person that's the same age, same ethnicity, same cultural background, and not to say that those things aren't very important because they are,
Mhm.
but those pockets of the world,
Mhm.
they expand your perception, they expand your boundaries, they expand your they even like reduce your limitations.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of the things that I've seen in terms of things that are regressing is people that want to stay in their own bubble.
Mhm.
They want to stay in their own safety,
Yeah.
sanctioned.
Yes.
And I don't think that that's what the world is about. I don't think that that's what growth, I don't think that that's what new age, moving forward.
Mhm.
You can't think the same thoughts, stay in the same place, and expect to move forward.
So now that we're thinking about the ones that are like staying quiet in their safety bubble and just thinking about in our students, do you think collage and mixed media can give students a freedom that other forms don't?
Hmm. So, it, because I absolutely think that collage is one of the most effective methods of creation ever. Because, like, so for example, photography is a magnificent thing, but photography flattens our physical 3D environment.
True.
Um, now, sculpture, there's definitely possibilities in sculpture, but usually sculpture doesn't entail um, the composition aspect that collaging can do. Whether it's a cityscape, landscape, or like something that's uber conceptual, you know, I think until we find another medium, especially when it allows you to be hands-on, collaging allows for texture, it allows for dimension, it allows for depth, it allows for um, to literally take things that are from different thought patterns, concepts, mindsets, and figuring out what they mean if you bring them together. To me, it's like a direct reflection of the possibilities of community, the possibilities of education, the possibilities of learning. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And now that you're talking about that example that students can use and all the models that students can use to express themselves, especially those that want to stay in the bubble and they're like afraid to speak out,
Hmm.
I want to transition to speaking about specific work. I am going to share my screen because I want to ask you about this beautiful work of yours. And I have it right here. Just beautiful.
Ah,
So this one is Y mi bandera vuela más alto que la tuya. When I look at this, when I look at mi bandera, vuela más alto que la tuya. I feel a mix of pride and tension. As a
Mm,
Puerto Rican, the
yeah.
flag has always been such a powerful symbol in my own life.
Wait,
And
wait, what has? I'm sorry, I missed what has been a powerful signal?
the flag, the Puerto Rican flag.
Ah, got it. Yes, yes, yes.
And all the layers with maps and chains made me, pause. What does the flag here symbolizes for you in this piece,
Hmm.
particularly? And what kind of responses have you seen from Puerto Rican viewers?
So the flag, when it comes to this work, the actual physical representation of the flag, and my flag flies higher than yours, to me is like a direct um, response to the treatment of how Puerto Ricans were being treated during this time frame of um, of the hurricanes, that specific hurricane. And because I knew how the flag can be used as a symbol, but then not always applied in terms of the overall hmm, the overall like moral it's used as a sometimes it can be used misused. Um, and I wish that more people wouldn't only see I don't know, like the representation of it, but in order to hold a reputation, you have to continue and decide on how you are carrying yourself, how you are, holding up to what you say you believe.
Mhm.
Um, and this is one of the things I'm prompting in this work. Um, yeah, and I think it's a very important question, and I'm asking of other US citizens. Because
Yeah, I have to
even
say that as say that again. Sorry.
even the notion of my flag flies higher than yours, right? Which is very specifically in this one, a Puerto Rican flag. But in comparisons, there are other territories, whose flag, who are who associate their flag a certain amount of like behaviors and responses and beliefs. And they have a right to value their American um, correlation, along with their cultural correlation and beliefs. And it's a merging of the two. Does that make sense? Like it's not only PR, but it's just as important as all the other territories.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, sometimes they ask it if the flag belongs to a different country. They don't realize that,
Mm.
Puerto Rico, it's part of the United States. They don't even recognize the flag. So I had to say there's a Puerto Rican born and raised in the island. When I first saw, this work, especially, mi bandera vuela más alto que la tuya, I felt right away, oh my God, like the flag isn't just fabric. It's a symbol of pride. It's a symbol of survival. And at the same time, the weight of our colonial history and
Mm.
seeing it layered with different other elements, I thought this is exactly how it feels to live with that complicated identity. So when you're asked how people from territories respond, I can say from my own experience, your art makes me feel seen,
Mm.
challenged, and also very, very proud. So,
Thank you.
so I hope you get more more feedback from other Puerto Ricans that live in here or that live in the island because it's very, powerful. And I wanted to ask you, have you noticed that Puerto Rican students or any other students respond differently than others when they see your work? What do they say? I want to hear about your experience with students.
So I will tell you. So for example, when I was teaching, and had a range of Latino and or very specifically students from South America, I hadn't created this work yet, either of these two series. Um, and I say that in relationship to teaching because that is the last time that I've in a while that I've been able to have direct contact with students in that way, you know. So for example, the thing about exhibiting, right? The thing about being an artist is depending on, your exposure and where you are and your education, all those things. It is not on the regular unless you cross the lines of like education, right? And or that you're famous enough that your work is being implemented um into educational platforms and arrays by teachers, by curators, by then and even when it is, you're reaching adults.
Mhm.
Unless another adult introduces art, your artwork to another to a student, you're usually reaching adults. And I'm not saying that as a complaint, but and then you have to, it's like it's you're reaching a specific grouping of adults, you know? So part of the reasons why I'm so passionate about getting this work and about my work in general, and specifically these works that speak to my own heritage, um, is because it's so hard to get them to the audience.
Mhm.
Um, it is absolutely so hard.
It is, but not impossible.
Not
Not
impossible.
impossible.
Not
And
impossible.
it's just it's super needed. And I wanted to talk about the title. The title translates to, and my flag flies higher than yours,
Mhm.
which feels bold, almost like a challenge. You're like, my flag, hey, flies higher than yours. So how do you think, how do you hope students or teachers will respond to the bold statement?
So, and I mentioned this, a couple of seconds ago, but it's like we, when it comes to specific iconography, or symbolism that has like a lineage of perceptions and history attached to them, right? To the iconography. Which a flag is an icon, it's an icon,
Mhm.
right? It's something that represents a whole lineage of other things, right? Um, and it's whether you believe in those things or not, right? And whether you act in those ways or not, right? And so what I'm saying with that phrase is it's not just the flag or patriotism or those things are not just they're not temporary. They're not immeasurable. They are things that have been valued, calculated, acted upon to beyond years, you know? And they don't fade in and fade out, or they shouldn't
Mhm.
fade in and fade out. Just as your behaviors, your character shouldn't fade in and fade out based on whether or not it fits you for that day, for that year. Um, so that's kind of I'm holding people, or at least attempting to put the perception or the question of okay, so the other aspect of it is if your if your beliefs harm others, that's not about the others, that's about you. And that's a whole other conversation. And more of us need to be ready to like engage, the willingness to engage ourselves within introspection. If your improvement and if your what's that word when you're stepping to the next layer or level of life. I can't think of the word, but if your rising up means someone else's oppression, someone else's demise, that says something about you, not them.
Absolutely. And I know a lot of students will be able to understand those perspectives and those viewpoints. And for English teachers, this collage, it's a visual text packed with symbols and flags and plants and maps and people, because you can see so many things in here. How would you suggest English teachers guide students in close reading this visual, with details, the way they might analyze imagery in poetry or in fiction?
So one of the things in terms of responding to that question is because there will be good and there are bad, there'll be bad, or there will be things that might go against the grain of what you believe, right? And that's life in general. Um, and you have to figure out ways to present that information. So for example, one of the detailing of this particular work is definitely extracted out of postcards that I found in that's going to be a string of text. Let me turn off this. um and so for example, the postcards that I found, there was no representation of Latinos, Puerto Rican, specifically Puerto Ricans that were my complexion.
Oh. Mm.
So this is not just I always try to give a mix. This is absolutely parts of this are absolutely about being proud to be a Afro-Latina, a Puerto Rican, a Caribbean, but other aspects are also challenging us.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying I scoured all of PR to find, whether or not there was a postcard that at least included one image of a woman my complexion or even a man. Um, but for the stores that I did, go to, I couldn't find any.
Wow.
And for me, and that's across Latin America. I would just want to point out because if you look at, I don't know if I mentioned on this because I went back as a child. I was being bullied, and
Oh.
so at age 5, I went to my mom and told her that I didn't want to speak Spanish anymore because I couldn't manage the bullying. And it seemed to me that it was being associated because I was a brown girl that spoke Spanish. Um, so the correlation, oh God, I just lost the correlation.
You were talking
The
about
thing before that?
identity. You were talking about identity, how you were bullied.
Yes, but I was trying to make the correlation between that and oh God, I hate when I lose a thought.
It's okay. I think students are going to be able to tell their stories just the same way you're telling your story. Because one of the things you mentioned was this is part of or of your identity. This is you right here. And
Mhm,
how proud you are of being Afro-Latina
mhm.
um, women. So I think students are going to be able to identify with you in the same way because another thing that you're doing is challenging. And this is the way that they can challenge what they're going through visual art. And I think it's just a powerful way for teachers to use in the classroom. Like you were mentioning at the beginning, they have to be very careful and also evaluate their own bias.
Yeah. Yeah, that's real. It's very important. It's very real because, I'm literally 48 years old and I can still feel how that one teacher that I described, not my favorite teacher, the art teacher, but the social studies teacher that literally the way she catered to some of the white boys in my class, I actually think it was inappropriate even for them, beyond that it was very specific because they were white, because they were boys. But when I tell you that like one of the boys sat at the foot of her chair and she would pet him, I'm like, this is not okay. Any way you look at it. Um, and I say that even more so about being mindful of how you behave and how you respond and how you enact your with your children
Hmm.
because you are a steward.
Exactly. I had a very similar experience than you when I was in school. And so yeah, those are the things that mark us forever, and they're still part of our identity. And
Yes.
it's still like you still thinking
Yo,
about
I
me.
still
You
remember
still
that.
remember because that was in 1995, and I still talk about it sometimes, and people look at me like there's some events in your life that they impacted you so badly that you don't remove them from your life just like that. You carry them everywhere you go and every interaction you have and everything that you do because that's what is driving your work. That's what drives your work.
Yeah.
And you just express it in many different ways, and this is your way of expressing that. And it's something very important for educators. Our students bring stories to the classroom.
I need to
And
put you on blur for just a minute because I have to get my computer. I've done one of the things that I always forget.
is that the charge is okay?
Yes. Give me a second.
Absolutely. That's perfect.
Okay.
And just going back to teachers, for teachers who bring this piece into the classroom, what themes or questions would you want them to highlight for their students?
Identity. Um, environmental issues. Um, even like very what I would call like not I don't know if it's rudimentary, but it's to me it's fundamental, but like our relationship to the land.
Mhm.
And its value, its importance, and its connection to culture. Those are some.
I love when you mention identity. And one of the things that you were talking about, it's that when you were bullied because of your Spanish, you stopped. So you basically lost the language, right? So you were basically forced to leave your identity at the classroom door and just adopt another one that wasn't even part of yours, and now you're fighting for it, and a lot of students are going to be able to transmit
Identify with that.
connect that with that just because now in the climate that we are right now, we are basically forcing them to leave their identity at the door. You enter, but you need to portray a different identity.
It's
I
very
want to switch. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, no, I was just saying it's very true.
Yeah.
Okay, I need you to stop again because I plugged it in, but I didn't plug it into the wall. Can you stop the recording again?
So I have to say that if mi bandera um, vuela más alto que la tuya, spark students to think about their national identity and their pride. I want to say that the U.S. Islands quilts seem to invite them now to grapple with history and resilience. And I
Hmm.
want to like take a look at how you bring those themes to life through the political and the spiritual sides of this quilt. And let's start with the political. On the political side, I noticed that was like the very first thing that I noticed the golden wings and what I think is the head of a bird, but they're attached to gold chains. And to me, it feels like a symbol of flight restraint, freedom, maybe held
Hmm.
back. How my teachers use this imagery to help students think about the contradictions of colonial history, or the desire for liberation and the weight of oppression.
Hmm. So one of the things in the research that I did in preparing for this body of work was I went and, researched the makeup, the composition of the flags per each territory, US populated territory. Um, and I started to question, how do you take a political, um, how do you imprint someone else's society, culture, you know, even language, whether it's dialect or an absolute, other language. And one of the ways to do that is through um, taking iconography that represents U.S. culture, overall arching dominant culture and dominance, not just dominant culture, but like control. And then you take a portion of that and you literally stamp it onto someone else's culture. And we're talking about millions of people.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how prevalent eagles are to the USVI. And I know I looked it up, but I don't remember, I can't recall it right now. But for this one, it was the eagle, and I can't remember the other symbology that's in the middle. And I was like, how does this relate to all of the people that are included in St. Thomas, St. John, and St. Croix?
Mhm.
How is this a representation of these millions of people? So that's why I put them, separated them and put them on chains.
Oh, wow. So do you see the wings, representing both resilience and maybe restriction at the same time?
I do. And that level of like inquiry or challenging or even just the research, and then you go into um challenging or accepting. You have to be able to process the information from when it was instituted, you know, versus then how it's became part of a whole, how many generations of USVI um, citizens,
Mhm.
and how some have internalized it, some have problems with it. There's always these things can be interpreted many ways,
Mhm. Yeah.
you know. And so the same interpretation of the eagle being free and resilient and um, um, but yet we assume that the actual physical animal, um, wording or beliefs that are associated with the actual animal are not translated or not always perceived or translated into how it is then depicted in this state issued flag.
Mhm. And then, and going beyond the imagery itself for this, the medium of quilting also tells a story
Mm.
besides that. And it's a form of, deeply tied to memory and storytelling that, like we mentioned before. But when I see this, all the stitches that you have in the layers, it almost feels like turning the pages of history. How do you think, or how might English teachers use this specific quilts, like this one over here, to help the students see art as a
Mhm.
narrative text alongside, memoirs or oral traditions?
Right. Um, so for example, in all of the quilts on the political side, one of the things I do is you will see inside of the circle, I use a reference of a map.
Hmm.
The gradient, the what I call like a rainbow gradient, is associated with how our society has chosen to depict um, the strength or weakness, the possible endurance of hurricanes
Hmm.
and or storms. But it's not just that. It's also relating to pressure, like to air pressure or pressure within the body. Pressure outside, weather pressure, with in terms of the elements, in terms of the environment, and then pressure within our own systems. Our society has depicted that. So, for example, how oh God, I think it's blood pressure. Like blood pressure is shown in a gradient, a color gradient. Um, when you are looking, if you have issues with your feet and you ever seen a gradient on a bottom
Yes.
of the foot,
Mhm.
that's about that. You have when we were at a point, I want to say like 6 years ago, when we were having really hot summers, and if you remember the air quality
Went down.
reports, they're done in gradients. Um, so these are things that I would reference and or referenced, and why I decided to create this representation of how we are impacting our
Mm.
environment, and then how it relates to environmental justice, because these things, the hurricanes happen in places that are, for the most part, majority people of color, a
Mhm.
range. And then you have tsunamis that happen to some of the like the um
In
or,
Asia. Hmm.
or the Mariana Islands. Yeah. Um, and then yeah, so there's a lot to dive into in relationship to these works, because then you have how does that impact the lack of support, lack of infrastructure, maintaining infrastructure,
Yeah.
lack of connection to one's land, separating them from their agricultural systems, their spiritual, cultural practices, and agricultural practices, and how that impacts health. A lot of these, because if you look at Guam, Northern Mariana Islands, a lot of those
Absolutely. Mhm.
citizens participated in the U.S. Armed Forces.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
excuse me, and the U.S. has an extensive um, system of sites that are allocated for the U.S. the U Armed Forces, U.S. Armed Forces, and they're throughout the world. And a
Mm.
lot of them is that they have annexed um, community and cultural based land from their citizens,
Oh,
me- meaning they have taken them away.
wow.
And so all of that is abstractly conveyed through these works,
That's
and,
such a
and other stuff. But yeah.
No, but it's a beautiful connection between, the farm and the meaning and the history. And do you see quilting itself as a carrying political weight in this context?
I am sure that there are layers of the quilt that I'm not aware of to directly answer yes to your question. But one of the reasons I chose quilts is because of how I was exposed to them early on, as I mentioned earlier, but also it's in relationship to the fibrous nature and how our human connection to fabric and textiles. Yeah, I often present, or when I'm in presenting, I present the question, when's the last time you left home without fabric? We use fibers, textile fabric to
Keeping.
um, to hide,
Mhm.
to express, to mourn, to celebrate,
Mhm.
um, to reinvent. And I probably could have done these on sheets, but I meaning because sheets are another form of what I would consider like a bedwear or bed meaning that they're close to quilts. Um but it's one of those things that everybody knows a quilt. It is part of associated with the pillow, the bed, the sheet, the and the blanket. I think part of my intention was to make it, I see this as being accessible. It's like one of bringing a concept, a challenging concept
Mhm.
down to the one of the least or most common denominators. Does that make
And
sense?
yeah, and I think you're making me see fabric
In a whole different way.
different. Oh yes, different perspective when you mentioned like the meaning behind every piece of fabric and when we where we celebrate and all that. And I was just like, yeah, that is right. So now that we have the political side, now let's talk about the spiritual side because, and then on the spiritual side, we also have quilts. We see a lot of fabric, and we meet a very different figure, the Moko
Jumbi.
Jumbi
Hmm.
figure. It's towers at the center of the spiritual side. I see it like protective, it's geometric, it's almost like mythic, I would say.
Hmm.
For teachers introducing this to students, how would you explain the cultural and spiritual significance of the Jumbi
Jumbi.
in
So
Caribbean tradition?
you know the Moko Jumbi. The Moko Jumbi definitely originated in Africa, right? The overall um, and in it is a storyteller. It is like a professing. Is that the right word? Professing the future, a guidance, a tool for guidance, and joy, right?
Mhm.
But there's also a representation of it in Puerto Rican culture specifically, and I can't remember the name, but the one in Puerto Rican culture is on the stilts as well. It has horns and they do
Yeah.
masks.
Mokoyo.
So yeah, and it is one of those icons that if you to me it can I could align it with the skirts and the drum and how every island has a version of cultural practice, cultural dance, cultural drumming that comes in that pairing.
Mm-hmm.
And if they also have a celebratory event that is associated with a festival or a parade, they have a version of the Mokojumbi. And I'm not saying the name is the same, but just as Puerto Rico has bomba, um, St. Thomas has bombala. And just as for every stop that the Nina de Pinta de Santa Maria took, picked up
Mm-hmm.
and dropped off, there's a version of the, of the imperialist and colonialist, you know, hierarchy and demonstrative power and rule, but then how people of color, um, how we physically quilt, how we physically um, cultivate, joy and healing forward through action and through activation and through dance, and through cellular rejuvenation. We cultivate throughout time these practices.
Absolutely, they do. And I
And
think that,
so when
mhm,
I say in the title, walk tall and heal forward, one, he's on stilts, or and I shouldn't say he, although the ones that I've seen have been male. I'm not gonna put a I don't know, like a binder on that. I'm sure there can be women doing this. But the point was walk tall and heal forward. Meaning heal forward in spiritual and cultural, grounded spiritual cultural beliefs, um, through activation, through finding a practice. And when I say practice, part of my practice is absolutely creating artwork, but I'm also cultivating other aspects of practice. I want to be a better bomba dancer. Um, I want to be a better dancer. I want to have more access to better expressed musicality.
right.
And all of those things are extremely important for our continued healing, our continued growth, especially amongst all of the things that are being thrown at people of color.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you about the title specific, the walk tall and heal forward. It feels both poetic and instructive.
Oh, it is. It absolutely is. It
And the rainbow
absolutely
radiating,
is.
the rainbow radiating behind, which is, behind the figure. And then now that you mentioned that, embody that call to healing, what message of resilience do you hope teachers and students might take in
Mhm.
from from this title, the way that will unpack, a title in literature?
So, what came to mind is that everything has a history. Everything has a provenance, and a provenance is very specific to the art world, but it's also in relation to and what's that called? Antiques or things that people give value, older things that people give value to, a monetary value and sometimes, of course, like an emotional value. And so for example, if you're interested in, hip hop, rap, or some version of a dance that is in a modern time, do the research, go back, find the trail, the threads of how it is connected to the past. That, that in any form is going to lead you to a higher purpose.
Mhm.
And if not a higher purpose, a higher understanding of life in general. And so, for example, that can be done, through investigating dance. It can be done
Mhm.
through investigating, music. It can be done through investigating art, whether it's like formal fine art or if it's design. If you started to look back at how design has evolved and changed
Mhm.
countless lives because of how design is used to be propaganda or to perpetuate a new belief, a new following, a new system, a new class of understanding.
And now students can use it as a method to tell their stories in a
Hmm.
different perspective. And I want you to think of the three pieces that we talk about today.
Hmm.
The first one was Mi bandera vuela más alto que la tuya, and the U.S. Virgin Island political and the spiritual. I want to ask you something and see if you can connect any particular literary work you think can pair really well with any of these pieces.
Oh my God, that's a really hard question. What literary work do you think it could compare to?
For me, like the Puerto Rican one, I can connect it not only with work written from Puerto Rico, but also like the stories that I read from other, for example, from Mexico, students, immigrant students from Mexico, that they feel so oppressed that, especially the students that come from indigenous backgrounds where their indigenous language was erased for the Spanish. So I can make that connections now that I'm, working with students that they about to lose their their heritage language. So they feel oppressed and they still in the fight.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And what's wild about that is that that's even that perspective is from that of a person outside of the third world perspective. Because there's versions of that that have happened throughout the world, especially to what they would call like resource rich, indigenous or native communities that have been quote unquote prior to Western or even, influence untouched.
Yeah.
Um, and what's amazing to me is the things that imperialism, specifically for this particular comment, has imperialism and very specifically capitalism, how they have taken over. It's hard to like to condense this thought that I have into one, but I was reading a book about an indigenous I want to say that it was in Brazil, if I'm not mistaken, an indigenous community, and they were talking about, I'm pretty sure it was near the Amazon, and they were talking about how white um what is the name of the people that come in and do they come in and do teach indigenous communities of Christianity and
The
this is a name
missionaries.
missionary.
Missionaries.
Yeah. So they were talking about how that process begins and how one it follows the story of one young woman who's watching the missionaries and with her understanding of the world, looking at this person and the questioning, like interrogation or just thoughts that are happening as she watches, this person. But then as she watches the process, because she doesn't understand all of the fuss about the oil, the taking of the land, and then you look at it, and it's not that I didn't know it before, but just to see it from the mindset of a young girl, and then as she raised to become, an advocate and I want to say like an instigator, but in a good way, challenging. But so little drop-offs. They would send missionaries in airplanes, and there was the wonder when they were 5, 6. They would look up at it and just be in awe, and then they began to drop off clothes and old things, right? And then they would run to, as any child would, run to these magical objects that come out of as any child would, in any culture all over the world, right? Especially if you have that, and even if you have been exposed to a airplane before, if this is landing on your back porch area, you want to know what's going on, right? And so then they would take it a little bit further. They would have more missionaries come to live. They teach them their religious beliefs, and then slowly begin to demonize and deconstruct their relationship to family, to culture, to spirituality, to land.
That's
Then
powerful.
you have where they would then one day some missionaries came, they got off the plane and they presented paperwork to someone that didn't have the authority. One, authority doesn't mean what it means in the white world versus this indigenous land. Okay. But it didn't matter because the white person got the signature of this person who was indigenous to the land. And then that spiraled the next stage. Do you see?
Yeah. It needs to keep happening, unfortunately. But this is why we need to empower our students, and our teachers are going to be the mean to empower the younger generations and allow them to express themselves through collage and mixed media, and or be able to take this and interpret it at school. You know,
Mm,
I would love to hear from so many different students. What do they think about it? There's perspective, especially from Puerto Rican students that came here after Hurricane Maria. They still risen to the country. So it will be very powerful to hear from them. Amber, I have to say that it has truly been an honor to share this conversation with you, not only as a fellow Puerto Rican, but as someone who deeply admires the way your art gives voice to history, identity, and resilience. I know that for our audience of middle and high school English teachers, your work opens up so many possibilities for helping students read visual text, connect art to literature, and to reflect on their own cultural identities, because that's something that we inherit from our parents. It's something important that we need to carry forever, and we need to feel proud of it. And I think that your work, it's going to inspire a lot of students to do the same. Yeah.
I just have one last thing. For those, that hear this and only that and may only hear how it connects to only people of color. The next wave of that, and it's always been an underpinning because capitalism is vast. There is always someone that wants to feel and believe that they are higher than, better than, smarter than those below them. Okay. And this doesn't just happen to communities of color. This happens to communities through lack of education, lack of access to basic human resources, but most importantly, lack of education and lack of money. And so, if you thought this only happened to people of color, I want you to consider whether it's your own personal heritage. How much money did your parents have? How many did you actually have a house? Did they rent the house? Did you move often? Um, did your parents have access to education? Did your grandparents have access to education? Was there anything passed on through the passing of your immediate family? How far did you have to walk to go to in order to get your education? How far did your education go? Were you able to get to college? Do you see yourself getting to college? Those things are not only about race, they're also about access to
Access.
education, to homes, and to money.
Yeah. That's such an inspiring note to end on, because, I know a lot of teachers and students will carry that with them, and they're going to reflect a lot. It's just very powerful. I want to say thank you again for sharing your story, your vision, and your art with all of us. This has been such a meaningful and powerful conversation. As we close, I want to thank you again for sharing
And thank
us
you
your art,
for
for your
for doing this with
wisdom.
me.
Oh, thank you. And you caught courage on, exploring identity, colonialism, and resilience. And for us English teachers, and I include myself, your work, it's a reminder that text comes in many forms, and quilt, collage, or a flag layer into artwork can be read in so many different ways, as carefully as a poem or a novel. So I encourage all the teachers to bring your pieces to the classroom and invite students to notice the symbols, unpack the titles, and connect visual stories to their own life experiences.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.